right, everyone. Hello, good evening. My name is Margaret, and today I'm going to talk about using Selenium to test your web applications. Just a fair warning, this isn't going to be a complete tutorial. Like, you're not going to walk away and be an expert at Selenium. It's just going to be like a taste if you've never heard of it before. And we're going to go through some code base a little bit and talk about what you can do with it, what you can't do with it, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to define what Selenium is. I'm going to talk about some of the more common use cases for Selenium. It's not just for testing. And then I'm also going to talk about some of the components that make up Selenium when it comes to testing. And then we're going to finish off with some examples and a demo. Not a live demo, just a regular demo. All right, so what is Selenium? It's short, sweet, to the point. It's a tool that automates browsers. That's really it. Once you get into working with Selenium, you'll get it. Like, it's not anything deeper than this. Some common use, I just kind of put this list together, but I'm gonna let you know right now, the list goes on and on. Like, Selenium is very robust, it's very powerful, so I just threw this together to kind of give you an idea of what people are using it for. But web scraping, if you're like a data person, then you might be familiar with web scraping. It's basically writing a script that retrieves data from websites and web applications. Bug reports is just repopulating bugs from web application. Bots is like I think some people think of bots like spam bots, but it's also just another way of testing, another way of retrieving information from web applications without manually doing it. And then finally, testing, which is what we're going to focus on today. But just wanted to give you guys an idea of what Selenium is all about, if you've never heard of it, and what it's being used for. So, the components of Selenium. So this is regarding just testing. You have your Selenium standalone server. This isn't really recommended for local testing because it's really not needed, and it doesn't enhance the performance of your testing locally. But this is something that you should incorporate into your testing procedure if you're going to be testing on a remote host. Like if you SSH into a server or something and you need to test something that's front end, you can't really open a browser remotely and do it. So you will use a Selenium standalone server, and then it doesn't matter if you do it remotely or locally, you need a browser driver, which are very easy to install and kind of get used to. I don't know about Apple, but I know for Windows, you need to make sure that the driver is in your environment path. So that's an extra step, but yeah, so you have a driver for Edge, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Firefox, and the other one. I think the other one is it Opera? Okay, but yeah, so other than, I always like forget. Anyways, other than a browser driver, you need your language-specific API. So this is the API that you're using to communicate with the driver that's gonna control the browser automatically. So Selenium supports C#, Python, Ruby, Java, and JavaScript. And for this demo, I'm using JavaScript, but all of those APIs have documentation on GitHub. There's a repo you can go to download and clone, so it's not hidden, so you can definitely learn it. Like if you're a Python person, go ahead and do Python. But for me, I just did JavaScript for now. So the URL at the bottom is just more information, like if you're wondering like requirements, version, I guess the version number currently, any type of fixes or bug reports that's been reported. You'll probably need to go to Selenium HQ and then go to the download page. That's where you'll get more information regarding your own specific setup. So this is just a little warm-up of what I am using for this demo. I'm using, again, the JavaScript WebDriver, Chrome. I also have Edge, but it seems like Chrome is a lot better when it comes to actually seeing what's going on the emulator versus Edge. And I'll show you guys that in a little bit. And again, the same URL, which shows the other drivers that you can have and the other drivers, or the browser drivers that you'll be able to download. And I'm gonna stop saying So regarding the API for the JavaScript WebDriver, I am highlighting these are classes. I'm highlighting these three classes because before I show you an example, these are kind of going to be the main classes you're going to use for your test cases. The builder class is a wrapper for the WebDriver class. So if you've ever, so the builder class is basically where you set up your WebDriver. Your WebDriver is the class that actually handles all of your functioning within the browser. So if you want to click an item, you want to type into a input field, you're using the WebDriver. And the by class is what's being used to target different elements on your page. So it's similar to just JavaScript find element by class name type of functionality. You're just kind of triggering elements based off of the CSS selector, name, class name, things of that nature. But you need, you're gonna need these classes. There's a lot more, but I just want to highlight the main three that I've noticed when I'm looking at examples and when I wrote out my own test cases that you use the most. So those are gonna be like your main three. Can you see it? Okay, you can see it. You can kind of see it. So this is an example that's in the repository for Selenium. And what's going on here, this is kind of easy to read, I believe, even if you're not like a JavaScript person. What's happening is we're importing 4 different modules from Selenium, the builder, which is what I just talked about, by, which I just talked about, key, and until. And what's happening here is, and this is going to happen no matter how complex your test cases are, you're going to have to instantiate a new builder instance. And again, the builder instance is the wrapper for the WebDriver class. I don't want to like talk too much like over anyone or confuse anyone, but you're going to need like your builder instance. And that's where you're setting what browser you're going to use. If you're doing it locally, you can set your URL there. Right now, it's just saying for browser, Firefox, and then build. This is just basically instantiating the builder class instance, setting the Firefox settings, and then building that out. So here, I would say is your test case, a simple test case. So the driver, which is the builder class, has a get method, and the get method is basically opening up a new promise. So what it's saying is, go out, retrieve this URL, and then once that URL finishes loading, go ahead and execute this command. And this is all this is saying is, it's kind of intuitive if you think about it. It didn't mark it, okay. So, so what it's doing is, it's finding an element on the page by the name Q. So it's finding an element with the name attribute equals Q. Once it finds it, it's going to type, which is send keys, type the word WebDriver into the search box, and then key return just presses like the enter key. So the key class has like control, alt, so all of those keys that you have on your keyboard, there's a constant for it within the key class that you can use, which is why it's being imported here now. Because how else would you like simulate the submission of a form or something without having that? So then this is going to be fired next, and all this is doing is the driver.wait method. The wait method is just executing this. Okay, so let me back up. This command or this line here is going to refresh the page. It's going to send the page to another URL. So it's basically just saying the web results from WebDriver search term. And so that's why we're waiting here, because we don't want to execute our next criteria before the page actually loads. So that's why I'm saying this is like a promise. This is a promise. So it's basically just waiting to make sure that the page loads, and then it's going to execute this. And until is the other module that we imported, which is always used with the wait method. So you're not going to use until anywhere else. And this is basically just allowing you to write your criteria into your test case without having to force the web page to be loaded immediately, which never really happens. So you have a method here called title is, which is an assertion. If you're familiar with any other like testing library, it's an assertion. You're checking to make sure that the title of the page is WebDriver dash Google search, and then you're waiting, I believe that's 1 second. Yeah. Now, you're gonna always have to quit the driver, and this is another neat thing, you don't always have to quit after your first test case. So, and I'm gonna show you example of this, but you can just like continue your test cases over and over again, and at the end, quit. So that way you're not creating multiple instances of the builder class to run like maybe 20 different test cases. But yeah, I think this is a fairly intuitive example. Of course, with anything that comes to coding, it can get more complex than this, but I think when it comes to what Selenium does and what you can do with it, it kind of shows you, what you can do. You can type, you can submit, you can make assertions, and then you can close out your driver. So, oh wait. Now I'm going to show you a demo. Let's see. Ironically, every time I go to a talk and people are saying, oh, I'm going to show you a demo, they do this, and I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. Why not just have it up and ready for me? And I'm doing the exact same thing, so I apologize. I'm a hypocrite.
It's your process. It's good.
Okay. And this is just that example I just showed you working right now. I'm going to do that again because I don't know why they were showing it. Hopefully they'll show it again. So this is kind of what happens when you run Selenium. And it is closing out because I did driver quit. So what it does, let me do it one more time and not quit it out. Should just show you the screen. And sometimes this is useful, like if you don't want it to just exit out, you want to see what's going on at the very last step, then it'll just show you what's going on here. But that's kind of what's happening. So you go to google.com or whatever URL you select, and then you select the input field that you want to type into. You type into WebDriver, hit enter, which is that key return, and then it shows this page. Now that until method waits for this page to load, and then it checks the title, which is WebDriver Google search against what we asserted for it. And since everything was successful, there was no error messages here. There is a way to kind of make this more colorful, but yeah, I don't have time for that one. But now I want to show you another example, and because that one wasn't showing locally how you test, and this is more so for your local testing, I'll just show you an example that is more so for local testing. And let me remember the name. Okay, can you guys see that? Okay, yeah, you can see that. So this is a test case that I put together for an app that I was working on called Moneyworth. And what I was doing here was just showing how you would do this locally. Now, another thing I want to keep in mind, and this is kind of something that happens when you read through the documentation, if you've noticed, you see your driver.get, and then you have to put in that URL, and that's hard-coded. Now, if you're like me, you like to pull that information out and then put that somewhere else, and that way it's a constant or something, and then you can just pull that in and only have to change that in one place. So there are constants you can use. I just didn't use it here. And again, this is just a teaser, but there's constants. Selenium makes it very easy for you to kind of make this more robust than what it is now, because imagine having a huge, complex web application with 100 different test cases. You're not going to want to do this. But for simplicity, that's kind of what I did here. What's happening, I did the same thing. I called get, and then I did then sent in this function here, which is doing pretty much the same thing I just showed you before, which is finding the element principal on my on the landing page, and then typing in only strings. Now, the gist of this is that principal has a validation criteria where it can only be numeric. So because it can only be numeric, there should be an error message that pops up and says, hey, oh, this must be a number. So that should always pop up if there's if the string that's being typed into that principal is not numeric, and that should be real time. You shouldn't be submitting and then getting that error message. So that's what's happening here. That's what's happening here, which is why I didn't use key, the return constant within this call here. And then now here we're making another assertion, which is why we're using the until class. And we're checking to make sure that within my principal box, which is the parent box where the error message lives, if there is an error message, that the error message should be contained within that box. And this should be shown on the web page. And then we're gonna wait another 1 second for that to show up. And there's some more text down here. I think it's because yeah. But let's go ahead and see how this looks. Oh, and this is another thing. So you see that I'm actually typing in node whatever. Definitely you can look into actually writing out your own script and putting it into your package.json. Yeah. Okay. Bear with me for a second. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much the test. And very much ignore the design of this. It's not the best design, but what have you. So anywho, so what's happening here is it is selecting this input box. That input box has an ID of, excuse me, principal, and then it's checking for this error message. This must be a number. If anything fails, what will happen is you'll get the error message within your command box. And let me just show you what that looks like. It's not the best, so that's why I say there's a way you can kind of pretty it up. I just haven't. But let's just do something like change the assertion here. Like maybe whatever. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. So you'll still get your errors, even if you'll still get your errors, and then you can kind of go through and look through and see what's going on here. But yeah, the error was it didn't see that text in that principal block, which is correct because I changed it up. But yeah, so that's just a really simple example. I'm hoping it didn't look too confusing. Selenium is pretty cool. The main reason why I even got into Selenium was if you're a PHP developer, you may work with Laravel, and Laravel uses Dusk, and Dusk is sitting on top of Selenium. So if you use Dusk, you'll be like, oh, this is really cool. This is really nice. You can check your front-end development, but you're not seeing that under the table is Selenium, and Selenium is just, you can use it all over the place. So yeah, that's kind of what it's all about. Let me get back here. All right, so that was the demo. Next steps. This is what I would just recommend personally is go to this repo and clone the repository. The reason why I didn't say this beforehand is because it's a very, very big repository. And so it'll take a little bit of time to just download everything. And you don't need to see everything. It's just all the code for Python and Ruby and JavaScript and Java. So it's all in one repository, and that's kind of where it sits. You can go through, read the code, look up the examples, read the README, and kind of get a feel for what's going on. Of course, write some tests yourself. I've always believed teaching is the best way to learn something, and then application is the second best. So I always try to, test it out, write some yourself, and then read the documentation for your chosen API. I use JavaScript this time, but these are the URLs for the other APIs. So yeah, and that is it. If you guys have any questions, I'm all ears. 5 years, started back in 5 years ago. I was about to just throw out a number. I'm like, what, 2007? I don't know. But yeah, I've been a developer for 5 years, mostly LAMP stack, so a lot of PHP development and some JavaScript, mostly the front-end JavaScript development, some React work, and honestly, some Java work as well. I've done some app development there, but that's kind of my past. And then maybe getting into some Python and some other stuff soon. But I'm really passionate about testing. I've only recently gotten into actually testing through one of my last positions that really followed that agile software development methodology. So we always had stand-ups and we had testing, and we were required to test anything, no matter how small. And so I got into like PHP Unit, which is the PHP testing library, and then I got into Selenium, and I started to really see my code quality improve, which is why I always recommend people, level up. This may not be like the most interesting, but no matter what you're doing, it's really important to just test above just manually testing your work. You really need to make sure that your code is as clean as possible. But I'm ranting, but yeah, that's kind of what fueled this interest.
How did you learn Selenium on the job, or how did you?
Oh no, I read it. I just kind of, actually, honestly, they say, like if you want to be pressured to learn something, why not talk about it? So I wrote out a talk. I didn't even know anything about Selenium before I wrote the talk. I'm like, I want to learn this. And so I wrote it out and I just started reading it and wrote out this presentation and stuff. So, yeah.
How did you get into coding?
So 4 years ago, wait, did I say 4 or 5? 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was working in Austin at a small business out there, and it wasn't, I tell people I went through like a quarter-life crisis where I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing right now. People would ask me what I'm doing, and I had this 60-second spiel of what I'm doing, and it's not really specific and like directed towards anything. It's just, I'm just doing all kinds of stuff. And so I just thought to myself, I need some type of focus. I need like a career, basically. And so that's kind of, I started thinking, okay, what was in school that I was really passionate or really interested about? And that was web development. So I started to get into that, and then I started to learn, and then I decided to go to a boot camp. So I don't have a traditional background. Went through a boot camp and got hired out in Houston, and yeah, the rest is history. But yeah, I just thought I needed a focus, and that was kind of my focus.
So, question. So for Selenium, I know that you can choose between 5 languages.
Mm-hmm.
So in your team, let's say each person choose different one, then how do you cooperate between all of y'all?
So each of your,
Let's say you choose JavaScript, but
Yeah.
somebody else choose Python. Then, like, if you have to test the first part of the website and somebody else tests the second part of the website, then how do you sync up your code, though?
but you guys won't have like all of the code base on your computers? Is that what you're saying? Like if you're working on Python and someone's working on JavaScript, you guys are like completely separate?
No, I just curious. Like,
Oh,
is
yeah,
that a
yeah,
problem?
Because I've never ran into that problem. Like if I'm working on PHP, 9 times out of 10, everybody else on my team is working on PHP work or JavaScript work. So it wouldn't be one person working on Python or whatever Ruby, and another person working on JavaScript. But if that was an issue, the APIs are very similar. Like I showed you some of the methods within like the builder and the buy class, but if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, you'll get the API information pretty smoothly. Like I ran through the Python API documentation, and it's very similar to JavaScript. You're still using the same like builder class. I mean, they're probably like calling it a different way because that's how Python is versus JavaScript, but if it comes to like having to go through and dissect someone else's code that's using a different language, honestly, I mean, if you're not like a language diehard person, then you should know it anyway, in a way. Like you should at least say, okay, this person's doing JavaScript, I have to test this person's work, let me go look at the JavaScript API to make sure that they're kind of doing it the right way or something like that. So that would probably be my response to that. Yeah.
I have a question.
So, I went through a boot camp and we learned Cypress. And do you know Cypress at all?
I don't.
Okay, it's very similar. But I just ended up getting stuck on mapped elements or like elements produced with a for loop or something where all the class names were the same, but they had different whatever, like it was like a reusable component. So how do you get around that? Is there a special way? Is it, I don't know. I guess since you don't know Cypress, I don't know if it's easier with Selenium or not, but like no one really knew the answer. And I'm like, has no one run into this problem before?
So is it like an example where you were retrieving maybe like 5 elements on your page with the same class name and then you need the 3rd element? Is that how it works?
Yeah, like if you had, I don't know, like a list of something and you had each of the list items were in a component, but it was the same class name and everything like that. It was just the information inside it was different and you wanted to pick a specific one because maybe it was a link or maybe it was, you know? And so, I don't know. Anyway.
Honestly, well, I've dealt with they have a method called find elements, which retrieve get elements by class name. So it retrieves you a list of all elements matching a specific class name. And I've had that issue with using Dusk, which is on top of Selenium, but I had the issue with that. And what I did was I just tried to find like a very specific selector. And this may not be an answer to what the issue you're facing, but like if I know I need the 3rd div with this class name, I would just use CSS. So there's a CSS method that you can use, and you can just like do a really specific CSS selector.
Like
that may
in
not.
child or something like that?
Hmm?
Like in child?
Right.
Something like that, yeah, child, or if there's like a name attribute that's set, or if you always know that you need a 3rd child of something. I don't know, probably like that. Like, I don't like using lists or having to map through a collection of elements because of that issue. I like to just use like really specific CSS selectors, but that may not be the same issue you're having, but I've had something similar to that, and that's kind of what I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a common problem.
Is it?
Yeah, because I use Fluverism for automation, kind of not really similar because we don't use code that much, but we do have to identify like elements on the website, and we run into a lot of problem like that. So sometimes I just like identifying a fixed element next to that element and use it as an anchor, and then you just choose the one next to that one. So yeah, I kind
That's a
of,
better idea.
yeah.
That's a really good idea.
It seems like a roundabout.
So the other thing is that if you're using a front-end framework, a lot of them have Selenium libraries that will integrate with the rendering engine and the control flow and everything, and so you can use that framework's own rendering logic to locate its elements and its directives and components and things.
Okay, so there's like framework specific.
Yeah, so like I think the most robust one is probably Protractor, which is the one for Angular. And so like with that, you can locate elements the same way that you built them as components in your page. Like using, going through MD4s and et cetera.